My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 44 years old. I run a small but successful architecture firm in Seattle. And for the last 9 years, I've been married to someone I thought was my best friend. I'm not the kind of man who forgets anniversaries or birthdays. I take care of things, provide stability, and never ask for much in return. I was raised to believe that love meant showing up every single day, not just when it's convenient. That's why what happened that Christmas felt like a blade through the spine. It started with a dream trip, a winter vacation I planned nearly 6 months in advance. A luxury chalet tucked away in the Swiss Alps. Ski passes, spa treatments, private chefs. I booked everything under one condition. We would go as a family, just me, my wife Angela, and her parents. That was her request, and I agreed. Her mother had recently been sick, so I wanted to give them a holiday to remember. What I didn't realize was that they had already decided how they wanted to remember it, and I wasn't part of the picture. 5 days before the trip, Angela started acting distant. Not cold, not cruel, just strangely busy. Every time I mentioned packing or coordinating airport pickup, she brushed it off. "I'll handle it," she said, almost irritated that I was even asking. I chalked it up to holiday stress, but something about the way she smiled while texting, then immediately flipped her phone screen down when I walked in. It started to itch at me, a silent, crawling suspicion I tried to swallow. The night before the flight, she kissed me goodnight with a strange finality. Her bags were already packed, and she said she had to go early with her parents to handle something at the airport. I remember standing in the kitchen the next morning, coffee going cold in my hand, as I watched her walk out the door with barely a glance back. She didn't even ask if I needed help with my suitcase. That's when I opened our shared calendar. My name? Nowhere. The flight? Cancelled under my profile, but on hers. Confirmed. Along with 3 other names, her mother, her father, and someone labeled Kay. Kay was her best friend from work. A woman she always said was like a sister, and suddenly it all made sense. The hushed conversations, the late-night phone calls, the giggles behind closed doors. I checked Angela's tablet, which was still synced to her messages. That's when I found it. A group chat called Christmas Unfiltered, and there it was. A full itinerary. Dinners, spa treatments, a sleigh ride, all with one glaring absence. Me. They had planned it, not just days before, weeks. A whole trip funded by my card, and I wasn't even an afterthought. I sat there watching the sunrise crawl across the hardwood floor, my chest hollow, not angry, not even shocked, just emptied. And that's when the stillness inside me shifted, not into rage, but into resolve. Because I hadn't just paid for their Christmas, I had paid for every single thing, and they had no idea what was about to happen. At 7:00 a.m., I picked up my phone. I opened the travel management portal, and I began to take back every dollar. One silent cancellation at a time. First the hotel, then the flights. Then the ski passes, one by one, their world unraveled. And less than 10 minutes later my phone lit up. 76 missed calls. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't scream when it enters. It whispers. It disguises itself in routines and smiles and half-hearted hugs. Sitting in that kitchen, watching the cancellations take effect, I wasn't driven by vengeance. I was driven by clarity. There was something chillingly empowering about moving in silence, about correcting the equation without needing to announce that it had been unbalanced. I wasn't trying to punish them. I was simply ending the illusion that I had ever belonged in their picture. I let the phone ring. I watched Angela's name flash on the screen again and again, followed by her mother, then Kay. Then came the texts. "Something's wrong with the hotel. Did you cancel the flights? Dan, please pick up. Each message arrived like a confession, not of guilt, but of surprise, that I had the audacity to take control, that I didn't just sit quietly while they cut me out, that I wasn't the man they assumed would wait back home with a bowed head and a broken heart. In truth, I wasn't broken. I was wide awake. And as the text turned from confusion to anger, I realized something deeper. They never thought I'd see the messages. They never thought I'd notice, because for so long I had made myself small, quiet, dependable, the man who handled the bills and made the reservations, but didn't rock the boat. They mistook my stillness for weakness. That was their first mistake. I reread some of the group messages Angela had written. "He's so clueless, he still thinks this trip is for us." Kay replied with laughing emojis. Her mother added, "Let him think that. It's easier this way. Easier for them, maybe." But that message stuck to my spine like ice. It wasn't just thoughtless, it was calculated. They had written me out of my own generosity and laughed behind the curtain. And yet, not once did I feel the need to call and shout. I knew silence would sting louder than words. Still, something inside me needed to understand why. Not to justify it, but to complete the picture. And that afternoon I remembered something. Angela had given me access to her iCloud a year ago when we were merging calendars. She had likely forgotten, or maybe she thought I'd never look, but I did. And what I found wasn't just messages about the trip. It was an entire timeline. Months of quiet exits, a separate savings account in her name, photos I had never seen, her laughing with Kay in Paris. I'd never been to Paris. That's when the emotional weight finally landed, not in anger, but in grief. I had loved a version of her that didn't exist anymore. Maybe she never did, and instead of screaming or confronting her, I did something else. I opened a document. I titled it, "The Goodbye She'll Never See Coming," and I started planning the quietest, cleanest, most final exit of my life. Wasn't interested in revenge as spectacle. What I wanted was sovereignty, the kind of peace that comes when you remove yourself from a story that no longer honors you. That afternoon, I took a long walk in the rain. No destination, no headphones, just the sound of my own breath and the rising clarity in my chest. I wasn't going to fight for her attention anymore. I was going to make sure she never got another dollar, another gesture, another moment from a man she no longer respected. By the time I got back, the messages had evolved into apologies. "Dan, this is a huge misunderstanding. We just wanted to surprise you. Can we talk?" I didn't respond. I didn't even open the threads. Instead, I forwarded all financial confirmations to a secure folder, froze the travel cards, and then made the call that would shift everything, to the private client concierge who had helped me book the vacation. I explained the situation. He didn't even hesitate. "Say no more, Mr. Mercer. Everything will be reversed. You'll receive a full credit within 48 hours. Then came the second phase, the home. Angela and I had a joint account, but the house was in my name. She had insisted I list her as an emergency contact, but never asked to co-sign the deed. It was a subtle power she never realized I held. That night, I called my attorney and set the wheels in motion. A quiet separation agreement. She wouldn't lose the roof over her head, but she'd lose access to everything that was once mine. No drama, no court battles, just a clean line drawn in the snow. But I wasn't finished. There was something poetic I couldn't resist. On Christmas Eve, as they stood at the airport with cancelled tickets and a frozen itinerary, I sent a single message to the group chat that they didn't know I could see. It read, "I hope the memories were worth it. I'm spending Christmas with people who see me." I never pressed send on anything else. Just that one sentence. A mirror held up to their behavior, a farewell dressed as understatement. I could imagine their faces, Her father checking his watch, her mother cursing under her breath. Kay flipping through her phone, panicking, Angela blinking at the screen, trying to figure out how I had found out. The silence on my end wasn't weakness. It was power. Every choice they had made was now echoing back to them in real time, and there was no confrontation for them to weaponize, just absence, just consequence. And then came the leverage I hadn't planned for. My assistant Nicole, who had helped me confirm Angela's travel plans, came to my office after the holiday. She gently placed her phone on my desk and said, "You might want to see this." It was a screen recording. Kay had accidentally uploaded a video from the trip planning chat to her public story, a full breakdown of how they had faked a reservation for me while planning private spa treatments for themselves. The video had been deleted in minutes, but Nicole had already captured it. I stared at the video for a long time. It wasn't just the planning, it was the tone, the glee. Kay laughing about how Angela had trained me to stay home without asking questions. Her mother saying, "If he finds out, just cry. He's too calm to explode." Angela chiming in, "Dan won't do anything. He never does." That was the moment something deeper snapped inside me, not out of rage, but out of realization. I had become so dependable, so composed, they mistook my discipline for impotence. But now I held something they didn't expect, proof. Not of cheating, though that was certainly implied, but of character, of mockery, of deception laid bare. I didn't plan to expose them publicly. That wasn't who I was, but it did give me options that I used with the same silence they had once used to erase me. I quietly removed Angela from every business account. No more emergency access, no more expense privileges, no more shared benefits under my name. The office holiday party arrived a week later. I debated skipping it, but I went, not out of pettiness but out of presence. I wore the same calm expression I always had, smiled, made small talk, and yet, inside, something had shifted. People noticed. Nicole pulled me aside and said, "Whatever you're doing, it's working. You look free." I simply nodded. I didn't need to explain that I had spent the last 2 weeks separating my life, thread by thread, from a woman who had confused loyalty with convenience. Meanwhile, the messages from Angela had slowed to a drip. She must have sensed something was coming. On New Year's Day, she finally showed up at the house. I watched her from the upstairs window, standing there, holding a takeout bag like a peace offering. I didn't answer the door. I didn't need to. The locks had already been changed. The doorbell camera blinked red. She stood there for 10 minutes, then left. A ghost outside a house she once called home. I filed the final paperwork that same week. Separation, financial disentanglement, and a private statement to her parents' legal advisor, a firm I had worked with on past commercial projects. I didn't make accusations. I submitted records, emails, calendars, payment logs, the group chat screenshot. It wasn't about revenge. It was about documentation, quiet, professional clarity. And once the paperwork was received, her parents stopped calling, stopped defending her. Their silence said everything. And then one morning, I received a final message from Angela. No emojis, no spin, just, "I didn't think you'd ever leave me behind." I didn't reply. I didn't have to. She was right. She never thought I'd walk away. She never imagined I would do so with no raised voice, no slammed door, just calm, final distance. The kind that couldn't be bridged by words or apologies. The kind that said, "This was your choice, not mine." There's a strange kind of silence that settles in after betrayal, the kind that doesn't ache, doesn't echo, just exists. It's the quiet that comes when you're no longer waiting for closure from someone who never intended to give it. After Angela's last message, I turned my phone off for a full week. No texts, no calls, just stillness. I went on long walks through the woods, sat by the fire with a book I'd never had time to read, and finally let the loneliness visit without fear. But something strange happened. It didn't hurt, it healed. She had underestimated one thing. When a quiet man decides to leave, he leaves completely, not out of cruelty, but out of self-respect. I wasn't punishing her by disappearing. I was protecting myself by not returning. For years, I had made excuses for her restlessness. I mistook her constant craving for attention as something I could fix. But you can't fill someone who tears holes in their own soul, and I had finally stopped trying. By February, the house felt different, lighter. Her shoes were gone from the hallway. Her perfume no longer lingered on the pillowcases. I started opening the blinds more, letting light in, cooking for one, not out of sadness, but out of reclaiming a rhythm that was mine. I repainted the office, gave away the vacation bag she left behind. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, slow healing, like scar tissue forming, where something once bled too much. Friends started reaching out. Some knew, some didn't. I never explained the full story. Not out of secrecy, but out of sovereignty. Let people wonder. Let silence speak for itself. Nicole, my assistant, eventually became more than just a witness to the storm. She became a friend. Someone who reminded me that loyalty doesn't raise its voice. It just shows up. Every day, without applause. And slowly, she helped me rediscover the version of myself I had forgotten to protect. The financial freedom felt like more than just numbers. It felt like clarity. I reorganized my accounts, invested in a new property, a cabin near the coast. Somewhere I could go when the world got too loud. I didn't block Angela. I didn't need to. I knew she watched my updates from a distance, the photos of the sunsets, the blueprints of the new project I was building. Not a word was said, but the message was received. And the strangest part, I forgave her. Not because she deserved it, but because I deserved peace. Carrying the weight of her betrayal was like dragging a body that no longer breathed. So I let it go, quietly, complete, and in doing so, I finally understood the difference between walking away and being free, because this time I hadn't just escaped something broken. I had stepped into something whole, and it was mine. Spring came early that year. I remember standing on the balcony of the cabin I'd bought with the refund from that ruined Christmas, watching the sunrise melt over the sea like soft gold poured over glass. I wasn't waiting for anything anymore. Not closure, not apology, not a twist in the story that would make it all make sense. It already did. She had taken me for granted, and I had quietly, permanently taken myself back. I never sent a goodbye. No long messages, no emotional final phone call, because the strongest goodbye you can ever give is no goodbye at all. Just a life rebuilt, so beautifully that the person who hurt you is forced to watch from the outside. And that's exactly what happened. She didn't block me. She followed in silence. She liked the occasional photo. She replied once with wow. But I never responded. The new version of me had nothing left to say to the old version of her. That summer, I was invited to speak at a real estate investment summit. I almost declined. But Nicole convinced me to go. I remember standing on the stage, sharing the story of rebuilding. Not the emotional one, but the financial resurrection, the resilience, the discipline. And afterward, people didn't just applaud, they stayed. They asked real questions. They shook my hand and said, "You carry something strong," and I realized it was peace. The kind you earn. Later that night, I went back to my hotel room and sat on the edge of the bed for a while thinking about who I'd become. Not a man who needed revenge, but a man who'd finally learned the quiet art of walking away with everything he came in with. Dignity, strength, and truth. Angela's choices may have shaken my world, but they couldn't destroy the foundation, because it was never built on her approval. It was built on who I was before she ever tried to rewrite my worth. The final paperwork came in June. Separation finalized. Accounts untangled. Clean lines drawn. I sent her nothing in return, not even a cold goodbye. What would be the point? She had already lost access to the real me, long before the documents arrived. What she had betrayed wasn't a man unaware. It was a man unwilling to believe someone he loved could be so thoughtless. But now I believed it, and I was free. And so, I moved forward, quietly, calmly, and completely, with no bitterness in my hands, only bricks. Bricks I laid into new plans, new partnerships, new possibilities, and every time I was tempted to look back, I reminded myself, some storms come to destroy, but some come to reveal the foundation was never them. It was always you. It was July when I saw her again. I hadn't planned it. I was at a local fundraiser downtown, one I had been donating to for years, when I turned toward the wine bar and saw her standing there, alone. No ring, no parents, no Kay, just Angela staring at me like I'd just walked out of a memory she had tried to bury. I didn't flinch. I nodded once, a soft, polite acknowledgement, and then I turned away. She followed. Of course she did. "Dan," she said, her voice fragile, "you look different." I just smiled. "I am." That was it. She asked if we could talk. I told her kindly, "There's nothing left to talk about. No anger, no coldness, just a locked door with no key." She searched my face for anything, guilt, invitation, hesitation, but there was none. I had given her everything once. She had gambled it, and lost. Later that night, Nicole and I shared a quiet drink under the outdoor lights. She didn't ask about Angela. She didn't need to. She knew. Nicole had been my mirror through it all, showing me my own worth when I had forgotten it, piece by piece. I realized then that loyalty doesn't show itself in the big gestures. It shows up in the daily presence, in the people who stay when you're not shining, in those who never laugh behind your back when you're not looking. I remember asking Nicole, "Why did you stay through everything?" She smiled and said, "Because I knew one day you'd remember who you are." And in that moment, I knew the healing was done. Not because someone new was beside me, but because someone old no longer had a grip on my story. My life wasn't defined by betrayal anymore. It was shaped by what I did with the truth. The truth is, some people only love you when it's easy. Others show up when you're in pieces. The latter, that's real, that's rare. That's who you build the next chapter with. Whether it's romantic, platonic, or just the version of yourself that refuses to shrink ever again. And I had found that, not in drama, not in revenge, but in presence, stillness, and truth. Angela may have left for Christmas, but I walked away for good. And in that quiet final decision, I reclaimed not just my holidays, I reclaimed my life. Autumn arrived, painting the trees outside my cabin in a fiery mix of orange and gold. I stood on the porch one evening, coffee in hand, thinking about time, about how much had changed, about how little I missed what I once thought I couldn't live without. It's strange when you're in it. Betrayal feels like the end of everything, but on the other side, it becomes the beginning of the most honest version of you. Angela's name came up less and less. Eventually, not at all. People stopped asking, not because they forgot, but because they knew I had moved on. Really moved on. Not the fake kind where you smile through bitterness, the real kind where you sleep peacefully and wake up excited. where you build without watching to see who notices, where your story is no longer shadowed by theirs. I wrote a piece for a business journal that fall titled The Power of Quiet Exits. It wasn't about relationships. It was about leadership, but the soul of it came from everything I had survived. It resonated. I got letters, emails, even a call from a university asking if I'd speak to their graduating class. Funny how the worst season of your life can become the foundation of someone else's hope. Nicole and I kept building. We traveled, laughed, sometimes sat in silence by the fire, comfortable in the knowing that not every chapter needs words. I never tried to define it. Whatever it was, friendship, partnership, presence, it was real. And that's more than I could say for what I had with Angela. It wasn't the title that mattered anymore. It was the truth behind it. And when Christmas came around again, I didn't go big. No extravagant gifts, no alpine resorts. Just a warm cabin, a home-cooked meal, and quiet music. The kind of night where nothing is missing, where you don't have to perform love, you just feel it in the room, without effort. I remember thinking, this is what peace feels like. Not loud, not dramatic, just whole. So, here's what I'll say to anyone who's been quietly betrayed. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to yell to be heard. Sometimes the loudest power is the man or woman who walks away with grace and builds an empire no one saw coming. Months passed. The business grew. I partnered with new architects, mentored a few young minds. The cabin became a gathering place, not for parties but for healing conversations. People who had been burned came talk, not to vent, but to understand. And I listened, because I knew what it was like to have your heart insulted and your silence mistaken for surrender. One evening, a former colleague said to me, "Dan, you're not just successful, you're untouchable." I laughed, but I understood what he meant. When you rebuild yourself from betrayal without bitterness, you become something rare. You become someone who cannot be manipulated again, not because you're hard, but because you're clear. And I had finally become clear. Angela's life continued somewhere in the distance. I never stalked, never asked. All I knew was she had lost more than a vacation. She had lost the version of me who believed in her. And once that's gone, no amount of calls or apologies can resurrect it. That's the real cost of betrayal. Not just losing the person, but losing their belief in you. Looking back now, I'm grateful, not for what happened, but for what it revealed, that my silence wasn't weakness, that my calm wasn't blindness. It was just waiting. Waiting for the moment when I'd remember that I was never broken, just buried beneath compromise and noise. And now I'm awake. I'm intentional. I'm present. And that presence, that quiet certainty, is what makes me dangerous. Not to others, but to every version of myself that once settled. I'll never settle again. Not in love, not in business, not in self-worth. Because once you've rebuilt from the fire, you don't fear the flame, you become it. If you've stayed with me this far, here's what I hope you carry. You don't need to fight loudly to win. You just need to stop giving people access to the parts of you they misuse. And then, slowly, intentionally, you build. You build in silence. You build with discipline. And eventually, your peace becomes your proof. Angela never got her apology. She never got her final word. Because the apology she wanted was rooted in guilt. And I had none left. The final word that belonged to silence. The kind that says, I see who you are. And I love myself enough to never invite it back. I'm not a victim. I'm not a villain. I'm a man who watched someone mistake his kindness for weakness, and chose to become the kind of man who no longer explains his value, just lives it, quietly, boldly, daily. And so if you're sitting in your own moment of betrayal right now wondering how to respond, let me say this: you don't have to clap back. You don't have to burn the bridge. Just walk away with your dignity, your silence, and your future intact. Because nothing terrifies those who underestimated you more than watching you rise without them. If you've made it this far, drop an 100 in the comments. It shows you are part of the 1% that's improving every single day.